There are moments in life that start out so ordinary you'd never guess how much they're about to matter. It was just another chilly morning in the city, the kind of morning where no one really makes eye contact. Phones glow brighter than the faces that hold them. People walk faster, talk less, always in a hurry to be somewhere else. And in the middle of it all, forgotten, still invisible, sat one man. He leaned against a red brick wall, wrapped in a coat too thin for the biting wind. His beard was long and peppered with grey, his eyes sunken but alert, watchful, not wild. Beside him, a battered cardboard sign, "Veteran, hungry, anything helps." He didn't shout, he didn't beg, he just sat there, silent, enduring, a ghost in plain sight. People walked past him like he didn't exist. Some turned their heads, pretending they hadn't seen the sign. Others saw it, and that made it worse. They glanced away with guilt in their throats and quickened steps in their heels. To them, he was part of the scenery, an inconvenience they didn't ask for. But someone did notice. Someone stopped. Out from a small cafe came a figure most people would recognize instantly. Towering, broad-shouldered, effortlessly commanding. Dwayne Johnson. Yes, that Dwayne Johnson. But on this morning he wasn't the Rock. He was just a man with a coffee in his hand and a look in his eyes that said he saw things most others. It didn't. He paused. Just stood there for a beat. The steam from his coffee rising between them like smoke from a signal flare. Then his gaze locked with the man on the ground. The man, Frank Carter, looked away as if expecting Dwayne to walk past like everyone else had. But he didn't. Not this time. Dwayne stepped closer. One slow, deliberate step. The kind of step that makes you wonder, what's he about to do? The air got quieter, as if the city leaned in to watch. Frank glanced up, uneasy. His instincts were still sharp. He'd once led men through fire and chaos. But here on this sidewalk he was just another forgotten name. Dwayne studied him for a moment, not with pity, not even with surprise, but with recognition. He saw the way Frank sat, still scanning the street like it was a battlefield. He saw the old, barely visible military patch, threadbare and frayed, on his jacket. And instead of dropping money and walking off, Dwayne crouched down, eye level, calm, steady. "Rough day?" he asked, his voice low, warm, sincere. Frank hesitated, then nodded. "You could say that." And that's when everything began to change. Dwayne Johnson didn't move. He just stayed there, crouched on the pavement, coffee cooling in his hand, studying the man beside him. Frank Carter, Marine, veteran, survivor, sat stiffly, not used to this kind of attention. He was used to glances that slid off him like rain on glass. He was used to footsteps that sped up the moment people saw his sign. But Dwayne wasn't like them. He didn't turn away. He didn't walk faster. He had stopped. And that alone made this moment different. Frank's voice was rough, as if unused to speaking. "I'm not looking for handouts," he said after a pause, eyeing the cash Dwayne pulled from his pocket. The words came out heavy, not defiant, but honest. It wasn't pride, it was principle. This was a man who had worn a uniform, who had led others, who had faced things most people couldn't imagine. Taking help for him wasn't as simple as taking money. It had to mean something, and Dwayne understood that more than he let on. He nodded, not insulted, not surprised. He placed the folded bills gently on Frank's knee, not as charity, but as a gesture. "It's not a handout," he said, "just some respect." Frank stared at the money. His fingers twitched. He didn't pick it up, not yet. He looked at Dwayne with tired eyes that had seen too much, and maybe for the first time in years, he wondered if someone truly saw him back. People on the street had begun to notice. A few slowed down, sneaking glances. Not because it was Dwayne Johnson, the movie star, though some might have recognized him, but because of the way he sat next to a man everyone else had ignored. No cameras, no entourage, just two men, one silently offering dignity to another who desperately needed it. And then Dwayne did something unexpected. He sat down beside Frank, right there on the cold sidewalk. No hesitation, no show, just presence, just being there. Frank looked over, caught off guard. "You don't have to do that," he said, unsure of what was happening. "I know," Dwayne replied with a small, understanding smile. That was when the silence settled between them, comfortable, not awkward. Around them, the city kept moving, uncaring and unaware. Horns blared in the distance. Shoes clacked on concrete. Conversations buzzed like background noise. But for a moment on this street corner, time slowed down. Frank shifted slightly. Not out of discomfort, out of disbelief. He hadn't felt seen. In so long, he'd almost forgotten what it felt like. "You know," he said quietly, "people like me, we're used to being ignored." Dwayne didn't flinch, his gaze steady. No one should be ignored, especially not someone who fought for this country. Those words hung in the air like a promise. Frank looked down at his jacket, brushing instinctively at the faded military patch. His fingers moved as if trying to straighten it, though it hadn't stood straight in years. "Marine Corps," he muttered. "2 tours overseas." Dwayne's jaw tensed slightly. He didn't say much, just nodded. "That's no small thing." Frank gave a dry, bitter chuckle. "Used to mean something." His voice cracked as he spoke. "Got injured on my last tour. Spent months trying to recover. By the time I got back, everything had changed. My body, my mind." He trailed off, stared down at his calloused hands. "I couldn't hold a job. Bills kept coming. My wife, she tried to hang on, but I wasn't the same man anymore. She left, took the kids." He didn't say it like a complaint, just a fact. A memory too heavy to lift. "I don't blame her," he whispered. "I lost the house, lost everything. Now I'm just getting by." He gestured vaguely toward the endless parade of people walking by, each one choosing not to see him. Dwayne listened without interrupting. He didn't try to fix it with words. He just let Frank speak, and when Frank was done, Dwayne leaned in, voice low but sure. "You're not just another guy. You're a fighter." Frank scoffed, shaking his head. "Maybe I was." "No," Dwayne said, firm now. "You still are. You're here. You're surviving. That takes strength." Frank looked at him for a long moment, as if trying to figure out why this man, a stranger, a celebrity, believed in him when no one else did. And for the first time in a long while, something flickered in Frank's eyes. Not fear, not shame, hope. Frank's hands trembled slightly as he stared at the folded cash on his knee. His fingers brushed it again, hesitant, unsure if he should take it. Not because he didn't need it, he did, but because something about this moment felt different. It wasn't pity, it wasn't guilt, it felt like respect, and that made it harder to accept. Dwayne could see the struggle written in Frank's eyes, the way pride and desperation fought for space in the same breath. But he didn't push. He didn't try to persuade. He just let the offer rest there, quiet and honest. And then, in a move that surprised even Frank, Dwayne stood up, not to leave, but to extend his hand. "Come on," he said, voice steady. "Let's get you something warm to eat." Frank looked at the hand like it was something foreign. He'd been offered scraps before, spare change, half-hearted sympathy. But this was different. This was a man inviting him to join him, not just helping from a distance. Frank's pride screamed to stay put, to decline, to not need help. But his stomach, his bones, and that tired sliver of hope told him otherwise. Slowly, almost cautiously, he reached up and took Dwayne's hand. The grip was firm, strong, and for the first time in what felt like forever, Frank felt like he wasn't alone. They walked side by side through the busy sidewalk, Dwayne adjusting his pace to match Frank's uneven step. The city pulsed around them, honking horns, flickering signs, chatter from cafes, but the energy felt different now. Not cold, not indifferent. Frank walked with a limp, shoulders still tense, but there was a shift in how he carried himself. He wasn't just another invisible man blending into the street anymore. He was moving with purpose, with someone who saw him. At the corner of the next block, they stopped in front of a small diner, the kind with red booths, warm lights, and a sign that buzzed just faintly above the door. Dwayne pushed the door open. A bell jingled softly. The scent of fresh coffee and grilled food drifted out like a welcome. A woman behind the counter, early 50s, hair tied up, eyes full of warmth, looked up. "Hey there, Dwayne," she said, smiling with familiarity. "You're in early." "Got a friend with me today," he replied, gesturing to Frank, who hesitated just outside the doorway. Her smile didn't falter. "Well, any friend of yours is welcome here." She grabbed 2 menus, waved them over. "Come on, take a seat. I'll be right over." Dwayne gave Frank a light pat on the back. "Come on," he said. "You're not just passing through. You belong here." Frank walked in slowly, the warmth hitting him like a wave. It had been so long since he'd been in a place that felt like this. A place with warmth, smells, normalcy. He slid into the booth as if afraid it might vanish under him. Dwayne took the seat across from him, pushed a menu in his direction. "Order whatever you want." Frank looked down at the laminated pages. The choices blurred for a moment. "I don't know. Maybe just coffee," he murmured. Dwayne shook his head gently. "Not happening. You need real food." Just then the waitress, Linda, returned, pen in hand. "What can I get you boys?" Dwayne looked at Frank, waiting, and after a long, almost painful pause, Frank cleared his throat. "A burger and fries," he said softly, like he was afraid to ask for too much. Linda smiled and jotted it down. "Coming right up." As she walked away, Frank rubbed his hands together. "I appreciate this, but I can't keep taking handouts." Dwayne leaned forward, elbows on the table. "This isn't a handout," he said. "It's a start." Frank looked out the window. People still walked by, still rushed, still avoided eye contact. "I've tried getting back on my feet before. It never sticks. Every time I think I'm getting somewhere, something knocks me back down." Dwayne nodded slowly. "It's hard, but you've fought harder battles than this." Frank gave a dry chuckle. "Yeah, but back then, I had a squad. I wasn't alone." Dwayne's voice tightened. "You're not alone now either." Frank turned, eyes meeting his. And in that second, the weight of the years, of disappointment, loss and silence, lifted just a little. The food came out hot, fresh off the grill, with steam curling into the air like something sacred. Linda placed the plate in front of Frank with a soft smile, then turned to Dwayne with a familiar nod. "Usual for you?" she asked. Dwayne nodded. "Yeah, thanks, Linda." She disappeared behind the counter, leaving them in the warm bubble of the booth. Frank stared at the burger like it was something from another lifetime. He picked it up carefully, reverently, as if afraid it might vanish the moment he bit into it. When he finally took a bite, his eyes closed for a second. He didn't say anything, but the look on his face said enough. It wasn't just food, it was a reminder that he was still human. Dwayne didn't interrupt. He let Frank eat in silence, just watching, letting the moment be what it was. And when Frank finally slowed down, napkin brushing the corner of his mouth, Dwayne leaned forward. "Do you want to get off the streets?" Frank exhaled, a long, tired breath. "Of course I do," he said. "But it's not that easy." Dwayne nodded. "No, it's not. But it starts somewhere. You need a place to stay." Frank shook his head almost instinctively. "I've been to shelters," he said. "They're rough, loud, unsafe sometimes. I'd rather sleep outside." Dwayne studied him for a moment, quiet. Then he said, "I know a place. It's not a shelter, it's a support center for vets. Real support. Housing, counseling, work, programs. You'd have a bed, a hot shower, structure. It's run by people who've been through it too." Frank looked skeptical. Places like that, they usually have waiting lists a mile long. Dwayne smirked slightly, then leaned back in his seat. They do for most people, but I've got a few connections. Frank raised an eyebrow. Why are you doing this? His voice wasn't suspicious. It was raw, uncertain. He wasn't. Used to kindness with no strings attached. Dwayne looked him dead in the eye. Because you deserve better, he said. You fought for this country. You gave everything. Now it's time someone fought for you. The words landed hard. Frank didn't answer right away. He just stared down at the last fry on his plate, turning it over in his fingers. He didn't know what to say to that. He wasn't used to hearing that he deserved anything. Most days, he didn't even believe it himself. Then, without another word, Dwayne reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. He stepped away briefly, made a quick call. His tone was firm, purposeful, like a man getting things done. Frank couldn't hear the conversation, but he saw the way Dwayne stood, confident, decisive, the kind of presence you trusted, even when you didn't know why. A few minutes later, Dwayne returned to the booth. They've got a bed open tonight, he said. If you're willing, I'll take you there. Frank looked at him, disbelief flickering in his eyes. There was a long pause. Part of him wanted to say no, to protect himself from disappointment, to keep drifting because at least that way he couldn't fall again. But another part, the part that had once believed in missions, in structure, in purpose, wanted to say yes. Finally, he nodded. Okay, he said softly. Dwayne smiled, not a big grin, just a small, steady expression of quiet pride. Good, he said, let's get moving. Frank finished the last bite of his burger and stood up, slower than most but steadier than before. As they stepped out into the street, the cool air hit them again. But this time, it didn't feel quite as bitter. Dwayne hailed a cab. Frank stood beside him, still clutching his coat, still unsure where this was all going. But for the first time in a long time, he had a destination, a real one, and he wasn't walking toward it alone. The cab pulled up just as the sun began to slip behind the buildings, casting the city in long shadows. The lights from shop signs flickered to life, painting the sidewalks with color, but none of it touched Frank. Not yet. He stood there at the curb, his fingers clutching the sleeves of his coat, his eyes flicking between the cab and Dwayne. There was something in his stance, rigid, cautious, as if part of him still didn't believe this was real. As if he was waiting for someone to wake him up from a dream that had gone on too long. Dwayne noticed. He always noticed. We've got a ride coming, he said, his voice calm, like someone telling a friend they're not late, just right on time. A yellow cab rolled to a stop in front of them, its engine purring. Frank hesitated for a beat. His eyes drifted down. The block, scanning the familiar blur of city life, people rushing, talking, forgetting. That street had been his home, his reality. Stepping away from it felt like betrayal and salvation at the same time, but he took a breath, nodded once, and followed Dwayne into the cab. Inside, the city's noise fell away behind the windows. Frank looked out in silence while Dwayne gave the driver an address. It wasn't the name of the Veterans Center, like Frank expected. It was somewhere else, somewhere unfamiliar. Frank's brow furrowed. That's not the place you mentioned. Dwayne turned toward him with that steady look. I know, he said. We're going there tomorrow, but tonight you need a real night of sleep, a hot shower, a quiet space. Frank's instinct kicked in, defensive and embarrassed. I don't need a hotel, he said. The center is fine. Dwayne didn't budge. Just humor me. One night, that's all. Frank didn't answer. He turned back toward the window, but this time he didn't argue either. When the cab pulled up to a modest but clean hotel, Frank stared at the entrance like it was a foreign world. He hadn't stepped into a hotel in years, maybe more, not since before everything crumbled. The doors slid open automatically as they stepped inside, letting in the smell of fresh coffee and soft lighting that made the place feel less like a building and more like a pause from the chaos outside. The receptionist smiled as Dwayne approached. "The desk. One room for my friend," he said, handing over his card without hesitation. Frank stood nearby, watching, stunned into silence. Everything about this felt surreal. The warmth, the kindness, the normalcy. A few minutes later, they stood in front of a door. Dwayne handed Frank a key. "Go in, shower, sleep, you've earned it." Frank took the key like it might break in. His fingers gripped it tightly. "I don't know how to thank you." Dwayne smiled, soft and simple. "You don't have to. Just take care of yourself." Frank nodded slowly, then stepped inside. The moment the door closed behind him, he just stood there. The silence hit first. Not the cold kind from sleeping outside, but the good kind. The peaceful kind. He looked around. A real bed, clean sheets, a bathroom with real soap and warm water. He sat on the edge of the bed, ran his hand across the comforter. It felt like dignity. While Frank rested, Dwayne wasn't done. He stepped back out into the night and made another call, this time to an old friend who ran a private security firm. He explained Frank's background, his situation, and asked if there might be an opportunity for someone who just needed a chance. The conversation didn't take long. Dwayne had that kind of voice, that kind of pull. By the end of the call, Frank had a job interview scheduled, if he wanted it. Later that night, Dwayne returned to the hotel. He knocked on the door. Frank opened it, looking like a different man. He hadn't changed much, just cleaner, less tense, but even his eyes looked lighter, more awake. Dwayne held up a simple paper bag. "Brought you something." Inside, a clean shirt, new jeans, boots that weren't falling apart. Frank stared at the clothes, overwhelmed. "This is too much." Dwayne shook his head. "You've got an interview this afternoon. They're looking for someone just like you." Frank's eyes widened. "Interview? You've got the experience. All you have to do is show up." Frank looked down at the clothes again, like they might vanish if he blinked. I don't know what to say." "Say yes," Dwayne said quietly. "One step at a time." Frank met his gaze, and for the first time in years, he nodded, not just because he needed help, but because he finally believed he was worth helping. The transformation wasn't loud. It didn't come with fireworks or viral headlines, at least not right away, but it was real. And it started the next morning. Frank stepped into the sunlight outside the hotel, dressed in the new clothes Dwayne had brought him. They weren't fancy, just a button-up shirt, clean jeans, and sturdy boots. But the way he wore them made them feel like armor, like purpose. He looked in the mirror earlier and didn't just see a man trying to survive. He saw a veteran, a man standing at the edge of a second chance. Dwayne stood waiting, his hands tucked into his jacket pockets. He didn't say anything right away. He just nodded, acknowledging the subtle but powerful shift in Frank's posture, in his eyes. "Ready?" he asked. Frank swallowed, nodded once. "Yeah, let's do this." The job interview was at a private security firm, one that had worked with veterans before, one that Dwayne had personally vouched to. It wasn't a guarantee, it wasn't a gift, it was a shot. And Frank was ready to take it, but as they left the hotel, neither of them realized someone had been filming, just a passerby with a phone. They had seen the two of them exiting the diner the day before, had watched as Dwayne helped Frank into the hotel. They captured a moment. Two men shaking hands, one clearly worn down by life, the other steady and calm. That clip made its way online with a caption that read, "Dwayne Johnson helps a homeless vet. Real hero stuff." It didn't take long before the video exploded. By the time Frank was sitting in the waiting area of the security firm, prepping for his interview, thousands had already seen it. Comments poured in. People asking who the man was, how they could help, where they could donate. Others shared their own stories of struggle, of service, of being overlooked. Within hours, local news had picked it up. By the end of the day, national outlets were running the story. But Frank didn't know any of that yet. All he knew was that for the first time in years, someone was asking him what he brought to the table, not what he'd lost. The interview wasn't easy. They asked real questions, tested his readiness, and Frank, to his own surprise, held his ground. He didn't stammer or shrink. He answered like a man who had found his footing again. When it was over, he shook hands with the hiring manager and stepped back outside into the sun, where Dwayne was waiting. "How'd it go?" Dwayne asked. Frank shrugged, almost smiling. "I think I've still got it." But the ripple was already moving beyond him. The veteran support center Dwayne had arranged for Frank was suddenly flooded with calls, donations, volunteers, offers of food, clothing, housing. What began as a single act of compassion became a movement. People saw the humanity in Frank, and through him, in others who'd been left behind. At the diner where it all began, Linda set up a donation jar labeled Meals for Heroes. Regulars dropped in extra bills. Local businesses called offering jobs. Strangers stopped by just to say they wanted to help, and Frank, he wasn't invisible anymore. Clean-shaven now, his eyes brighter, he returned to the center, not just as a man in need, but as someone who had something to give. Other veterans began to gravitate toward him, hearing what he'd been through and finding comfort in the honesty of his struggle. He didn't pretend it had been easy. He didn't sugarcoat the pain. But that's what made his story matter. And Dwayne, he stayed in the background. When reporters asked him for quotes, for interviews, he politely declined. "This isn't about me," he said. "This is about Frank. About every man and woman who wore a uniform and came home to be forgotten. They deserve more." And somehow, that made the story even bigger, because kindness without a spotlight hits deeper, and when one man chooses to see someone that the world ignores, it can light up the entire city. Frank's journey wasn't over, not by a long shot, but something had shifted, something real, and this time, he wasn't walking alone. Back at the Veteran Support Center, Frank began to settle into a routine, a real routine. Mornings with coffee, shared with other men who understood. Evenings spent in quiet conversations with counselors, unpacking the years he'd tried so hard to forget. For the first time in ages, he had a clean bed to sleep in, a hot shower waiting. When he woke up, and the simple, powerful feeling of being safe. But it wasn't just Frank who felt the impact of what had happened. That one moment on the sidewalk, the hand Dwayne offered, the dignity he gave freely, had reached far beyond the streets of the city. Online, the video clip that captured them had snowballed into something no one could have predicted. Stories poured in from veterans across the country, men and women who had felt invisible until they saw someone like Frank being seen. People weren't just watching, they were acting. Donations to the Veteran Center tripled. Local shelters got phone calls from people asking how they could help. Small businesses reached out with job offers, clothing drives, even housing pledges. One simple act had lit a fuse of compassion. And Frank, whether he meant to or not, became something bigger than himself. He was invited to speak at a local event honoring veterans, and though his voice trembled and his palms sweated, he stood tall. "It's not just what Dwayne did for me," he told the crowd. "It's what he reminded me, that I still matter, that people still care, and that sometimes that's all it takes." The words hit hard. Not because they were polished or perfect, but because they were real. The diner where it all started, where Frank first tasted normalcy again, transformed too. Linda, the waitress, added a framed photo of Frank and Dwayne to the wall with a handwritten note. It started here. The regulars, they started talking. not just about the video, but about what they could do. One guy started organizing weekly meals for the local shelter. Another reached out to a local job training program for vets. The ripple, once small, had become a wave, and through all of it, Dwayne remained in the background. He never once made it about him. When the media tried to spotlight him, he respectfully declined. "Frank's story matters more than my name," he told one reporter. "And there are thousands of Franks out there. Let's focus on them. He didn't do it for the headlines. He did it because it was right, but that didn't stop the world from paying attention." The story made its way into national broadcasts, morning shows, podcasts. Even schools began using the clip in classroom discussions on kindness and community. Frank's resilience and Dwayne's humility became a blueprint for something more, a reminder that empathy still had power. That action, no matter how small, could echo. Frank, now more grounded than ever, began volunteering at the center that had taken him in. He'd sit with new arrivals, guys who looked just like he had weeks earlier, and he'd tell them the same thing Dwayne had told him. "You're not done. You still matter." And you could see it in their eyes, the flicker of belief, because sometimes it only takes one person to see you, for the rest of the world to start looking too. It had started with a glance, a single moment on a cold city sidewalk. And now, weeks later, as Dwayne stood once again outside the Veteran Support and Housing Initiative, he watched something quietly incredible unfold. Frank, clean-shaven, walking with a steadier step, pulled the center's door open and disappeared inside. He wasn't just entering a building, he was walking into the next chapter of his life. Dwayne didn't follow this time. He stood there for a beat longer, taking in the sight, a quiet pride behind his eyes. Because this wasn't about him. It never had been. But seeing it, that transformation, that man reclaiming his future, it was a feeling no movie role, no fame, no headline could ever match. Sometimes the real heroic moments don't come with explosions or applause. Sometimes they look like a man finally stepping into warmth after years in the cold. Frank's journey wasn't some neat Hollywood arc. It had bruises and detours and questions that didn't always have answers. There would still be tough days, nights where the past echoed louder than hope. But now, for the first time in a long time, Frank had the tools and the people to walk through those moments, not just survive them, but grow beyond them. And it all began because one man chose not to look away. That story, the sidewalk, the meal, the hotel, the job interview, it spread because people recognized something familiar in it. We've all seen someone like Frank, on a street corner, near a subway, maybe even in our own families. Someone carrying pain we don't always understand. And we've all had that choice, to keep walking or to stop and see them. Dwayne didn't do anything flashy. He didn't post about it. He didn't turn it into a brand. He just helped quietly, completely, human to human. And somehow that simplicity made it louder than any speech. Social media kept the story alive. More people were moved every day. Veterans from all over reached out to the support center, asking for help. Communities organized local drives inspired by the moment between Dwayne and Frank. Even schools began using their story to teach about empathy and action. It had become more than a viral clip. It had become a message. No one is beyond saving, and no act of kindness is ever wasted. But for Dwayne, none of that was the point. He wasn't looking for credit. He just believed in doing the right thing, when it counted. And maybe that's what made it count even more. Back inside the center, Frank stood in front of a small bulletin board covered in flyers, job postings, workshop schedules, community meals. His eyes paused on a photo pinned near the top. It was one of the first photos taken of him after he arrived. Clean clothes, shoulders back, a half smile on his face. Someone had scribbled a caption underneath it. Not just surviving, thriving. Frank reached out, gently adjusted the corner of the photo, then turned and walked down the hallway with purpose. Outside, Dwayne looked up at the sky. The evening was coming in soft and blue. He slipped his hands into his jacket pockets and started walking. No cameras, no entourage, just a man going about his day. But inside, something stayed with him. Because he knew the world didn't change through grand gestures. It changed through moments like that. One man seeing another, one life lifted, one person choosing to care, and if even one more person decided to look, to act, to believe because of what happened here, then it wasn't just Frank's life that changed, it was all of ours. Frank Carter's story isn't just about redemption, it's a reminder of what's possible when one person chooses to care. Dwayne Johnson didn't just give him a meal, he gave him his dignity back. And in doing so, he didn't just change one life, he awakened a movement. If this story moved you, if it made you feel something, hope, warmth, even anger at how we treat those who've served, then don't let it stop here. Let's make this message louder. Hit like if you believe in second chances. Drop a comment below. What would you have done in that moment? And don't forget to subscribe for more true stories that prove kindness still exists in this world, because sometimes the smallest gestures spark the biggest change, and maybe, just maybe, you'll be the reason someone gets their life back next.